This is the Learning in Hand podcast. I'm Tony Vincent, and this is the show where I share tips, how-tos, and ideas for handhelds in teaching and learning. Episode 24, Project-Based Learning in Hand, recorded October 2010, happens now. I've been an advocate for mobile learning since 2001, when my fifth graders in my classroom each received a Palm handheld. We used a variety of software applications every day. Favorite apps were ones where students created something to share with others. Today it seems the handhelds of choice for education are iPod Touch and iPad. Use these devices along with other kinds of computers for education, and you've got mobile learning. Mobile learning can happen anywhere, in a classroom, at the dining room table, on a bus, in front of a science exhibit, anywhere. Portability is not as important as the ability of the learner to connect, communicate, collaborate, and create using tools that are readily available. Apps, podcasts, and websites provide options for personalization of learning inside and outside the classroom. Students have access to learning resources when and where they are needed. These readily available tools are great for project-based learning. In fact, let me show you a sample project. It's a 5-minute video I made entirely on an iPod Touch. It addresses the question, what makes a good vice president?
The United States has had 47 vice presidents, from John Adams to Joe Biden. The word vice comes from Latin, meaning in place of. Sometimes the vice president is called the VP or Veep. Whatever you call it, everyone knows that the vice president takes over for the president in case the president dies, resigns, becomes impaired, or is removed from office. Being vice president sounds like a big deal, but what other duties does the VP have? Well, not many. The Constitution says that the VP serves as the president of the Senate, where he only votes in the case of a tie. He also presides over the counting of electoral college votes. The president may ask the VP to advise him or her or undertake a specific task. The Constitution doesn't give the vice president much to do. Perhaps that's why Hillary Clinton was not interested in being President Obama's VP. As Secretary of State, she has many more duties. You know the U.S. has 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. The Constitution keeps these 3 branches separate. However, it's interesting that the vice president can be considered a member of 2 branches, the legislative and the executive. As president of the Senate and tiebreaker, it would seem that the vice president is part of the legislative branch. As advisor and potential successor to the president, it would seem that the VP is part of the executive branch. Former VP Dick Cheney had an office near the Congress and an office in the West Wing of the White House. Most commonly, though, the VP is considered part of the president's administration and part of the executive branch. If you want to become VP, you have to be at least 35 years old, born in the U.S., and have resided in the USA for at least 14 years. You'll need to be picked as the running mate by a candidate for president. On Election Day, states vote for electors that will cast their own votes for president and vice president. You must receive at least 270 of the 538 electoral votes. It is possible to become president without being elected president or vice president. In 1973, VP Spiro Agnew resigned. President Nixon followed the process outlined in the 25th Amendment and nominated Gerald Ford as the new VP. Ford was confirmed by Congress. In 1974, President Nixon resigned, and Ford became president, having never been elected. As president, he did pardon Nixon for the crimes that led him to resign. 8 VPs have taken over the presidency because of the death of a president. Add Ford's succession to the president, and that means 9 out of 47 VPs have taken over as president. A whopping 11 of the 47 vice presidents have been from New York, and many were from large states as well. Being from a large state may help candidates win elections, but it probably does not make them any better at the job. Dan Quayle was from Indiana and was not considered to be a particularly good vice president because of his many misstatements and silly sayings. He once said, "I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix." He also said, "If we don't succeed, we run the risk of failure." His goofs were embarrassing, and I wonder how much the public would trust him to be president if he had to take over for President George H.W. Bush. So what makes a good vice president? Since the VP's role is to take over for president, I think the same qualities that make a good president also make a good vice president. While Dan Quayle wasn't the best public speaker because of his multiple goofs, I think a good VP should be a good communicator. This way, they can offer good advice to the president. Above all, I think a good VP needs to know the U.S. Constitution so that they understand their role and others' roles in government. Most vice presidents have had a law degree, and many have spent years of their lives studying the Constitution. After all, presidents must take an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and that might just be an oath a VP takes if he or she becomes president.
Let's take a look at the process behind creating a project like mine. I'll share tips for developing driving questions and share how a handheld can play a role in planning, research, and presentation of projects. iPod Touch and iPad can help students plan, research, and present their projects. Let's glimpse a few of the many apps and possibilities. Start by planning an anchor video or activity. A short podcast or video can give enough information to spark interest in and questions about the topic. The entire class may view the same video, or perhaps the teacher has hand-picked videos for each driving question or groups of students. If not a podcast or video, perhaps there's a class activity that can be the anchor activity. With hundreds of thousands of apps, podcasts, and iTunes U videos, chances are you can find something that grabs student interest. As for the planning piece for the student, mind mapping apps can help in planning projects and guiding research. They can also help in outlining scripts. Idea Sketch is free and makes it easy to connect ideas. You can toggle between map view and outline view. Similarly, Poplet for iPad makes joining ideas a cinch. There are many alternative concept mapping apps in the App Store. Handhelds can definitely play a role in investigating and researching the driving question. Students will probably use the Google search box in Safari to find information. Safari is the web browser built into every Apple handheld, but there are browsers that can facilitate better online researching. Atomic Web Browser adds many features needed when researching, including the ability to search for text on the page that's currently open. Another important feature is tabbed browsing. Users can open multiple links from one page. They load in the background, ready to be searched and read. Most likely, students will copy and paste notes into apps like Notes or Evernote. Or, because it's annoying to switch between apps, many will want to write their notes on paper. Researching might not use the web. Instead, students might investigate the topics themselves. For example, students looking into the topic of homelessness may record interviews at a local shelter. Or students may be investigating how to convince shoppers to return their carts to the proper locations. They might gather data using a spreadsheet app and take photos and video in a local grocery store parking lot. Those mind mapping apps can be useful in organizing all this information. After all, the next step is to present the information to others. Presentations can be narrated slideshows like, "What makes a good president?" I use the Sonic Pix app to record a voiceover to a series of images. In fact, images are likely to be important in any project. For images, students may take their own photos. Devices with cameras make it easy to snap pictures and import those pictures into another app. If your device does not have a camera or the project requires a photo that cannot be taken by the student, then it's necessary to seek out images on the web. Since projects are designed to be shared with others, it's important that students have permission to use the photos they take from the web. In most cases, public domain or Creative Commons licensed images give the public freedom to use them in their projects. You saw in my example that I imported saved photos into apps like Comic Touch, Doodle Buddy, and Photoshop Mobile to add and edit images. Those apps then save their images to the Photos app, where they can once again be imported back into other apps. Other ways learners can present their projects include creating comics. Students can bring in images into the app and add speech bubbles and captions. These can be saved as images and posted to a blog, wiki, or any kind of website. Or they can be printed out and bound in a book. A favorite comic creation app for iPod Touch and iPad is Strip Designer. Flipbook is an animation app. Students can import images and draw on them. Duplicating frames and making small changes creates an animation effect when all of the frames are played quickly in succession. StoryKit lets users combine images, drawings, text, and voice into an electronic storybook. The storybook is saved online as a web page. iMovie is available for newer handhelds for movie making, but many prefer Real Director because it works on older iPod Touches and iPads. Combine images, video, and audio with the Real Director app. Splice, trim, and split video clips, and pan and zoom video and photos. You can also add titles and subtitles and choose from 28 transitions.